non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believer's, welcome. My non-university unstudents, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor. I'm sitting here this evening in my Oregon State Championship World Series Oregon State baseball hat covering my bald dome because it's cold and snowy outside. But do you ever have questions that seem to counter your faith? Ever wonder about things that you think maybe other people don't want to consider? Or, goodness, you ever have ideas that even seem to contradict Christian faith? This is your show. In this series, wait, what? I'm inviting you to ask me your questions, and you can do that directly at uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com. If you ask a question that enough other folks are struggling through, I'll address it inside a show, or maybe I'll even address it as a show. Today, I'm addressing science. Does science disprove Christianity? Now, I have a whole series on faith and science, 16-part series, but I'm going to address it a little differently in the episode today because we are told, we're meme-barded, that Christianity is just faith. Science is for smart people who embrace logic, and Christianity, like all religion, is for people who are not logical, who do not embrace the true wiring of the universe. So, as a preliminary, I just have to say this. It's not wrong to question your faith. It's not wrong to question the faith. I mean, Jesus himself said, count the cost. You need to know what you're getting into. In my Bible reading this morning, Proverbs, and the New Testament loves to refer to and quote the Proverbs. Proverbs 14:15 says, quote, "The simple believe everything, but the clever consider their steps." That proverb, like dozens of others, is urging the believer toward wisdom. And wisdom comes in part from asking questions, from wondering, from studying, from listening and learning. It's not wrong to question your faith. It's the simple, or the fools elsewhere in Proverbs, it's the simple who believe everything. And man, I just don't have as much faith as the simple. I just don't believe everything that is foisted on me. It's not wrong to question your faith. Oh, and here's Jerry.
Hello, my name is Jerry Stinger, and since 2017, I've been a premium member of the Uncensored Unprofessor. I believe deeply in the mission of the UU to think more deeply. In this politically correct world, I value a deeper understanding of the whys of my faith. Dr. Ed and the UU program gives me these important tools. Won't you join me in giving a monthly pledge to the Uncensored Unprofessor?
There is a widespread, media-driven, university-taught notion, meme, that science and Christianity are in some kind of battle. Mostly it's a silly way to put Christians and the church on the defensive. Those who assert that are clueless to know that in history it was mostly Christians who came up with science as we know it. There are entire books on the Christian origins of modern science, but let's recognize this meme, science disproves Christianity, for what it is. A silly way to put Christians and the church on the defensive. It's just easier to dismiss Christians when you believe they are ignorant Cro-Magnon types. Because science doesn't disprove Christianity, let's think on a related matter. How should we think about truth? Or how should Christians think about truth and religion? I want to give you some helpful angles. The first one is that all truth is God's truth. Clement of Alexandria was an early theologian. He lived in the 2nd century, Alexandria, Egypt. And he taught that Christians have no reason to fear the truth. God is the source of all truth. The truth can eventually take us to God Himself. So among many things, this means that science and Christian religion are not at odds, are not opposed to one another. Sure, individual scientists can be at odds with Christianity, but more commonly, it's philosophers, whether serious or not, who are at odds with Christianity, not scientists. Most scientists are not philosophers, do not stop and reflect upon the premises or implications of their scientific knowledge. It's philosophers who ask questions about origins and life's meaning and the significance of morality, consciousness, integrity. Scientists rarely ask those things, but this also means that science and Christian doctrines are not at odds. There is no Christian doctrine that is opposed to reason, even if some doctrines transcend reason. I mean, the consubstantial union of Christ transcends reason. God being three in one and one as three transcends reason, even though both doctrines have their logical components. So, all truth is God's truth. Thank you again, Clement, for that, for reminding us to think that way. I think a second important thing to consider as we work through the tension, the supposed tension between science and Christianity, or truth and Christianity, is that God created our brains, our ability to reason, our intelligence. He does not mean to pit His revelation, His truth, against our intelligence. God created human beings with the amazing capacity to understand complex chunks of God's creation. It's really quite amazing. Now, that we can understand does not mean we understand like God understands, but we can understand sufficiently, not exhaustively. We don't have omniscience, we never will. So yeah, God's truth and identity and life and its many mysteries can transcend, does surpass, frequently towers over our intellect, but truth is not in a UFC fight with human intelligence. Can human intelligence oppose itself to God's truth? Sure, duh. But so can all other elements of human existence. Our freedom, creativity, our desires, our hungers, all of those frequently oppose themselves to God's truth. Back when I went off to college, and then again later when I went to seminary, my own family, conservative Christians, and a bunch of my friends, they were all concerned that I would think too much, get mired in deep thoughts, and eventually reject God. And it didn't take me long to realize that thinking is not the problem. Thinking too much is not the problem. Thinking erroneously is the problem. That's the problem, being in error. Thinking contrary to God's revelation is the problem. Thinking contrary to the truth is the problem. So, God created us with brains that can understand, not exhaustively, not perfectly, but that can understand sufficiently. And this is important, you guys, because our minds, our intelligence, is a path to the will. That's why truth and science matter. The intelligence is a path to the will. What we think shapes what we choose. Peter Kreeft and Ken Ticelli put it nicely, quote, "The intellect is the soul's navigator, but the will is its captain. The intellect is its Dr. Spock, the will is the soul's Captain Kirk, and the feelings are its Dr. McCoy. The will can command the intellect to think, but the intellect cannot command the will to will. The intellect can only inform it the way a navigator informs the captain. So the will cannot simply make you believe. It can't force the intellect to believe what appears to be false, or to disbelieve what seems to be true. Belief is what happens when you decide to be honest and put your mind in the service of truth." End quote. That's a good reason why I started this show, you guys, the Uncensored Unprofessor. To put our minds in the service of truth, to turn our minds on and go deeper for the service of truth. But what's important from that quote is that what God really wants from us is our heart. And in biblical Jewish reality, heart means willing, choosing. Our heart has to do with the constant direction of our lives, the bent of our orientation, the bent of our being. And in that regard, the mind, the intelligence, can bend and shape and influence, and redirect and bless and help the will. What we think matters. What we believe matters. If one, like a good secular university professor, believes that we cannot know the truth, I just wonder, on what basis does one argue that? Isn't it true that saying there's no truth is a true statement? Or isn't saying we cannot know the truths of the universe, isn't that claiming to have knowledge that is itself sufficient? Right? How can you sufficiently know that there are no truths? How can somebody sufficiently know that there are no scientific truths? How can someone know there are no religious truths? So clearly arguing that there is no abiding truth to guide humanity is itself a dogma based on some truth. Maybe based on someone's belief that the final truth of it all is non-truth. Oy vey. It gets to be irrational at some point. But my summary to this point is that truth is truth. And that's true if we're talking about science or religion or reality or meaning, even purpose. All truth is God's truth. Thank you again, Clement. Clement, my good man, you're correct. So you guys, we Christians need not bifurcate our perspectives on reality between faith and science. Science does not wreck my Rybarczyk faith. Scientific truth almost always builds my faith and affirms my own UU faith. It's sort of like biology. The Bible teaches we're male and female. Science proves the same to be true over and over and over and over and ever so the same. Honestly, I really believe this weird bifurcation between religious faith and reality is a strange post-Enlightenment development. Again, I go at length at that about the Cartesian shift in my very first series. You'll find it on my web page or at Libsyn. But this weird bifurcation is a strange development in human history. For all of humankind, truth was truth. But here's what the deal is. Secular philosophy aches for supremacy. Secular philosophy aches for religion to be put in a cage and kept over there in a private corner. This is about control and power. And when the church goes along with that privatizing game, and honestly both Christian liberals and Christian conservatives do it, my soul is wounded. Conservatives privatize the faith when they say, it's not a religion, it's a relationship. That almost always causes me to throw up a little in my mouth. It's a relationship that's meant to be about everything, and everything's called religion. Or conservatives privatize Christianity when they say, I just know that I know. You've reduced it to something very private. Liberal Christians, for their part, do that. They privatize and limit the faith when they teach that all those miraculous elements in the Bible are merely ancient myths and legends. Or liberals also privatize Christianity when they teach Jesus was just a good prophet, a community organizer. You're reducing and reductionizing Christian faith. So my point is, you guys, there are many, many ways to privatize and delegitimize the faith. Like when you only practice your faith at church on Sundays. But my point is, when the church goes along with that game, it drives me bonkers. We should not go along with Lord Zeitgeist's game of privatization. Because if it's true, it's true. And that's true whether we're talking religion or science. And our minds, ourselves, praise God, can know the truth.
There are other ways to support the podcast. Consider heading over to iTunes to leave a review. This will help the podcast get noticed and gain some traction. Also, consider sharing this episode with someone you want to open the discussion with, or if you feel it would help their faith journey.
Let's go deeper. Religion can know and teach us things that science cannot. Science can know and teach us things that religion cannot. And that's because science and religion are different schools, different tools for helping us understand reality. Science cannot measure the effect of angels. Religion cannot measure the flow of electricity. But they're not in a fight with each other. Science cannot help us understand ongoing human anguish. Religion cannot track the effects of gravity. But the two, science and religion, are not opposed to one another. Science can't give you a meaningful approach to life. Religion cannot develop new vaccines. Religion and science are two worldviews that are complementary. They help us navigate the different complexities of life. Science can't touch and heal your soul the way religion can. Religion can't fix your computer the way science can. And science was, again, mostly as we have it in the 21st century, a product of some 700 years worth of religiously oriented, Christian-minded thinkers. Science and religion are two different ways to analyze reality, but they're approaching the same vast sweep of human existence from different vantage points. How else? How else should Christians think about science and religion, or science and Christianity? Well, I think it's important to note that, and I want you to please know that there are limitations on science itself. Good chap. If Christians and our religion is not omniscient, please know that neither is science. Science is not omniscient, for Pete's sake. So I want to work through for you the limits of science. Science often can tell us how things happen, like our neural networks firing, or it can explain cause and effect. Science can often tell us how things happen. It cannot always tell us why things happen. Interesting limitation. Frankly, science cannot tell us whether things should happen, since that question, ought, is a question beyond the scope of science. It's not testable. Oughtness is not measurable. Science is limited in the sense that it cannot make ethical or moral decisions. Again, ethical and moral questions are beyond the scope of science's method and purpose. Like, is abortion ever legitimate? Is euthanasia ever warranted? Should animal rights ever trump human rights? Or what are human rights grounded in? On none of those questions is science helpful. One online journal article put it, quote, "Science does help us describe how the world is, but it cannot make judgments about whether the state of affairs is right, wrong, good, or bad," end quote. Thank you, UNDSI, Berkeley. Another limitation pertaining to science, and I think it's helpful to understand these limitations. There's no teleological directive in science. Class, please say teleological. Teleological, teacher. There's no teleological directive in science. It can't tell us where history is headed or where life is headed. And that's why technology is always racing ahead of ethical questions. Scientists want to do things, not ask whether they're immediately moral. Science can't tell us where it should be headed or why.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Ollie.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Ollie. Another limitation of science. Science, for all of its insight and aid, cannot help us live with much purpose. It doesn't help us cope with the loss of a loved one. It doesn't very well help us prioritize our lives or set meaningful goals. I mean, I've never met...
How long, Ed?
I've never met anyone who has made science the basis for how they do reality. Ever. Because it would be a dry and cold way to live. Heartless. Beautyless. Hey, the other day, while I was formatting this episode, it began snowing. The wind was howling. The snow was shooting almost horizontally, big, huge flakes. My patio furniture was, against my plans, being covered in a white frosting. And that quick storm gave the trees, it made my lawn get quiet underneath the coat of that cold white cloak. It's so mesmerizing. Since I was little, I've always loved riding along in a car watching the snow come down, and it seems to come down at an uprighting arc as it comes across the front of the car. It catches a breeze and comes up and hits the windshield, or just the way the car goes into the snow as it falls looks like we're taking off. It's especially fun at night when the snow races down into a car's headlights. Again, it looks like you're taking off, going up. What'd I do? Well, I thought you needed a little mental time out there. We can't just think and go more deeply all the time. Significantly, another limitation, science itself rests upon claims and assumptions it cannot prove. Now, this is really, really important philosophic unpacking. Science itself rests upon claims it cannot prove. For example, science believes that there is always a natural cause for the things that happen in life. It cannot prove that. It can't get to the beginning to prove that, but it heartily believes that. Or science claims that the universe is closed, that all there is matter, that there's nothing beyond the physical universe. Science cannot prove otherwise. But that the universe is a closed system, that's a faith assertion through and through, right? Really, what's to keep me from believing there are universes outside of our own, or that there are dimensions beyond the universe itself? Doing that is just not so hard to imagine, Jerry. Here's another assumption of science, that human beings can rightly understand reality. Again, that's a faith statement through and through. But if you don't believe it, if you don't think we can understand reality, there's 0 point to doing science at all. That we can understand reality is a belief positively oriented. It's one that follows a very Western Judeo-Christian belief. God gave us brains to understand. Most scientists don't say it that way, but they do believe that human beings can rightly understand reality. Here's another profound scientific limitation. Science can only measure or explore what it is designed to measure or explore. So it's kind of a phony, disingenuous thing when scientists or philosophers say, life after death is not real because science cannot prove it. Science cannot prove it because it can't measure it, so it can't prove it or disprove it. Life after death is beyond the sweep. It's beyond the reach of science. The tools of science cannot reach. The tools of science cannot reach beyond this life. The same thing's in play regarding God. Science can neither prove nor disprove God's existence. Now, you and I know there are clues for God's existence, but there are also profound emotional arguments that seem to counter God's existence. It's not a simple up or down. It's not a simple yes or no. So, when someone today says science has disproved the existence of God, Peter Kreeft and Ken Tuccelli say it's fair to ask, which science? Which discovery? By whom? When? What's the proof of that? Which religion did it disprove? I encourage you to go get Handbook of Christian Apologetics. It's a great little book. In fact, let's go deeper still with the limits of scientific knowledge. There are many different conundrums, uncrackables for science. Let me note just 3 of those. The origins of the universe. Science can argue, mostly through extrapolation, using the speed of light and the movement of matter and carbon dating. Science can mostly extrapolate that the universe had a beginning, but it cannot prove what caused that beginning. And I think it's fascinating that for some 2,500 years, philosophers have fought against the universe having a distinct starting point. Many philosophers implicitly know that saying it had a beginning implies that it had a beginner, a starter, which is called the cosmological argument. It didn't cause itself. Science can't uncrack the code of the universe's origins. Here's another one that science can't resolve. Miracles. Look, there are just times when medicine nor science can explain how or why someone was healed. I had a student when I was teaching named Megan. She had a horrid blood disorder, and it caused her to experience massive swelling in her face. And one year when she was at a youth conference in San Diego, someone up on the platform gave a prophetic utterance calling for someone to identify themselves and as having that a blood disorder, as having a swollen body, swollen face. Megan raised her hand for prayer. Well, the people around her then laid hands on her, prayed for her, and when she woke up the next morning, her facial swelling was entirely gone. Not long after that, she went in for blood work, for blood labs, and that confirmed it. Her blood was healed. She's still healthy today. That's a miracle. You mean prayer can heal a blood disorder? Well, yes, God can heal a blood disorder following the faithful prayers of loving folks, but science can't explain any of that. It's not designed to explain that. Here's a third conundrum, a third uncrackable for science. Science has a hard time with meaning. Science is great. I'm grateful for science. I wouldn't physically be alive without science. But science can't tell us about meaning in life. Science can't even tell us how to structure the chords of a song. Science doesn't help us to find meaning in the beauty of a garden. Science can't help us to see the beauty of an unfamiliar face. Science has little to no clues regarding meaning or aesthetic judgment. In fact, and I don't want to belabor the point here, but the more science has become predominant in our worldview, the less important beauty has become around the planet. It's a weird simpatico. Science seems to, I don't think it means to, but science seems to stomp out beauty. I think that's because it's uncomfortable with mystery. And beauty is a mystery. Beauty is magical and meaningful and soul transforming. Right? Why does my looking into that horse's brown eyes immediately convey meaning to me? Because I'm experiencing another sentient creature on the planet who deserves my respect, who deserves the right to be an animal, deserves the right to be its horsey self, and who I believe, when that horse looks into my blue eyes, also sees a sentient being in front of it, her, him. Just looking into a horse's eyes is full of meaning. Or, why does the chord structure of a Rush song, sad to me that Neil Peart just died, why does the chord structure of a Rush song go straight into my bones? It's amazing. How can a chord structure bring tears to my eyes? You guys, the other week, Tanya and I went and saw the theatrical presentation of Fiddler on the Roof.
If I were a rich man.
There were several songs where I sat there tearing up. The music, the orchestration, together with the fitting lyrics and their dancing and the show set's lighting, all of that plowed deep down into my soul, and I loved it, and I felt touched, and I teared up, and I smiled, and I laughed. Music is, performance is a mystery. And anyone who writes music will tell you that, yeah, there are some rules to keep, but it's artistry and magic that comes in and bends the rules and twists the rules, and they orchestrate it into something unexpected or into something perfectly expected. Science has a hard time with meaning and mystery and beauty. Beauty, you magical beauty, you. So, does science disprove God? Hardly. Does science disprove Christianity? Nope. Science and religion are mutually distinct disciplines. It's like asking an electrician, hey, what's the electrical quality of that hickory smoked dish of ribs you just cooked? Doesn't make any sense. Science disproves Christianity. That's like asking, dude, what's the mathematical formula you used to write that holy Christmas hymn? The question doesn't follow. The premise is mangled. That one can somehow eliminate religion or God or Jesus Christ's resurrection with science is like asking a chef to explain her top-selling soup. Hey, ma'am, what's the atomic structure of your slow-cooked chicken soup? She'd look at you with a totally puzzled face. Of course you need measurements. But the delicate flavor of her soup that lights up our taste buds is the result of art and skill and magic and person, not some scientific formula. Yes, thank you, God, for science. Yes, thank you, God, for true religion. And thank you, God, for brains that not only can understand both science and religion, but for brains that can touch upon the layered mysteries of life as you, who live outside the boundaries of our universe, created it. Beauty, beauty, beauty. Holy, holy, holy. Turn your brains on, everybody.